come on. Hey, feel the rhythm. It's getting from the deepest of your soul. Now, use your senses, and everything will be easier than before. Keep on moving, funk is coming. Blind yourself, big. You'll become the star in this die. Spread your wings, fly to me. Funk is coming.
Jon McDropout. That's always been a super interesting nickname. I never asked you. I mean, why that nickname? Is there a story behind it? Is there something?
Yeah, I mean, I had a name just kind of tagged to me just from bands I was playing, and they used to call me Johnny Dropout back in my punk rock days. And I played for a band called the Dropouts back in the just northern Alberta area here. And I'd always kind of liked that image, but kind of wanted to create like a persona for myself online. So that's my girlfriend there.
Hey.
Who is, yeah, totally. I wanted to create a persona for myself online that was sort of distinct, but sounded like a real name if you kind of gave it a first passing. And so McDropout kind of was an attempt to kind of give it like a real flavor of a real name, but like also to kind of like indicate maybe like something about like I don't know. I used to have this idea about like the Michanization of the world, that we were kind of creating fast food outlets and creating this sort of fast food convenient mentality in things. So I just wanted to like attach like a Mick to everything to sort of create like a suffix that would indicate that.
Okay.
I don't know if that was if it came through or anything like that, but that's sort of how the name developed. And then I just kind of always liked like adding an initial in for no reason. That always felt like a really interesting thing to do for me. So I just kind of settled in with Jon F. And I don't know, it always seemed to work for me. It was pretty distinctive, I felt, and like, but also like kind of my name is John, so like it kind of gave me like an easy way to talk to people.
Right.
So
yeah. No, it's super cool. I mean, yeah. I mean, I guess it doesn't make sense. You mentioned punk. That is one of the things I want to talk to you about, but later on.
Sure.
Okay, so let's start from the beginning, because we have met each other many times, many years ago. You were way more active on the scene, like the cool kids say, right? I mean, scene.
Absolutely. I was actually going. I went through like a hard drive the other day just as I was firing up my computer, and like I was amazed at how many Hangouts I had actually like saved and like in my hard drive there, and like how many I'd actually been involved with. Like it really struck me that like, man, there was a few hundred that like had like, I don't know, just my direct involvement.
And then I mean, almost all of a sudden, I wouldn't say you disappeared, but you just toned it down a lot, and to the point that I mean, I actually had issues, reconnecting with you because I had no really idea which platform were you in, if you were still on a platform, stuff like that. So why did that happen? Was it because you were getting bored? Was it because, I don't know, the conversation was exhausted for you? Same topics? What was that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a combination of things there, right? I mean, I think like there was a real dynamic with Google Plus, I think, that had, I don't know, that I felt like sort of like didn't really carry over to a lot of the other platforms that things ended up in. I felt like there was like a real like openness to interaction with Google Plus that really doesn't like kind of translate into things like Facebook or things like even other social media enterprises like a Reddit or anything like that. And I don't know if it was entirely that I like lost sort of the appetite for the conversation, because I still feel that urge to talk about it, and I still do. I'm voracious in my appetite to read about it still and to discuss it with people out there. I think it was just that the platform itself seemed to have degraded. And I don't know if that's like maybe maybe that it was just me just getting sick of it, or feeling like there was like some sort of like obligation. I always feel like, some of these things that we do, like these passionate projects that I have, like as soon as I kind of become obligated to do them, I feel like I lose a lot of the momentum that sort of originally comes with them. And I think that like, that's one of the things I always want to try to avoid is like I like to keep my passion for things, and so I try to make sure that like I never kind of over obligate myself in the things that I really do enjoy. So I mean, I don't know, like maybe it's partially that, and like thinking back on it, like it was also just like there are like hardware issues, like whether or not it's worth it to maintain the hardware and keep things going is a big question. In the continuation, I'm sure lots of us have like over the years have had that conversation with ourselves whether or not we want to reinvest in the technology to maintain our presence online.
Right.
And I think that like when I just started looking at it, it didn't seem like it was worth it for me to continue on in that aspect. But whether or not do I miss it, and do I wish I could just like pick it all up as it was again? Like yes, I do feel that longing for it. It's not like it wasn't important to me when I was doing it.
That is actually really interesting because a lot of people I talk to. So I wouldn't say that I don't think that anybody said that they got bored about the conversation, but for some of them the hidden message was there. That you get to a point where you basically have the same conversation over and over and over and over again. And you're just, okay, I mean, what the fuck am I doing here, right? I mean, I'm just, saying the same things to different persons, over and over again. So it becomes less, engaging and less interesting for them. But that doesn't seem to be what happened to you. I mean, you
No, absolutely not. Yeah. I mean, I kind of felt like the conversation sort of like stagnated for me, like that there wasn't maybe like the progression that I wanted, and I think that people do get frustrated in that same way. But I think that like I was never bored with like listening to these guys yatter on about this shit, or trying to like reanalyze what their position is, or how they're making those justificatory leaps and things like that. I was like I still will listen to Jason Burns prattle on for a half hour, 45 minutes about different things, and it's not that I don't feel like that same interaction, like I need to have that same interaction with him,
right?
But I do sort of like hold myself back now to not invest that much energy into it. And I think that that's where I've sort of settled, right? Is that I try to make sure that I withhold the amount of investment that I'm putting into these guys now. Whereas I think before I really did have like those sort of, I don't know, it's like the anthropologist's hope, that like somehow like there's a way to connect my culture with their culture,
Right.
And we're going to be able to translate and have some sort of like open communication that way.
Yeah, I mean, which is just also a polite way to say that that yeah. I mean, there were some people which were still having the same spiel, but yeah, no, I get.
I mean, I still follow a lot of these guys, right? Like my YouTube follow list hasn't changed all that dramatically. Like I have cut out some of the more toxic stuff, but it's weird because that's like included a lot of atheist channels that I used to follow too. And like I think that what I'm looking for is not necessarily like just only serious conversation or only people being like super polite to each other, but I think I'm looking for something that's like a little more, I don't know, like a Christian might say like edifying or something like that, right? I want something that's less negative in its tone and its aspect. And I don't know if like that's part of like what is pushing me away from it. Like maybe that the personalities have seemed to, the ones at least that have floated to the top seem to be like sort of acerbic. There's an edge to them. Like there's a strength of their personality that seems to sort of push them to the top of the list. And I don't know if that's if you've noticed that at all. I'm sure.
Well, yeah, up to a certain point, no, I totally agree with you. It's right. I mean, there's definitely a rehash, and sometimes they're rehashing all the bad parts, without getting. I mean, it used to be that you were happy to speak with somebody with where the conversation or the argument might get toxic. But I felt, at least years ago, that there was a progression. It wasn't the starting point. While now I've seen a lot of people that they start with the most toxic and vitriolic point of view as a starting point, and they just go from there, which is it just shuts down all the old conversation altogether. So.
Yeah, and I mean, in some cases, that's clearly the tactic that is like selling.
Oh
the
yeah.
best, right? It kind of places you in a position that like appears to be superior to whoever you're speaking with, and I understand that. I mean, it's the impulse to be right on the internet all the time is like, I don't know, I felt it too, and I think that we all have that. It's like it's embarrassing to be called out live for anything that might be wrong or inappropriate, and I think that like the people who are least able to kind of take those criticisms are like in some ways like the ones who end up having these shows, or like end up being the ones who like are the people who are leading these groups, and I don't know if it's
So,
so like maybe we can get into that.
No, yeah, I mean, because I had a question I want to ask you, but I will ask you later, because, what you said before about, toxic stuff and things like that. So I remember you being someone, during the conversation, you should tell. I mean, we could tell that you were somebody who cared about the argument, or, the person and stuff like that. But I also remember, and again, you correct me if I'm wrong, that at times you were really engaging, and sometimes you got to a point where it seemed to be that you got a little bit too involved into the conversation. I mean, I'm not going to say you got mad, but you definitely were one of those persons that could get feisty,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I wouldn't deny that. That's for sure.
Is it a trait of your personality that is still present? Do you feel that with age, has mellowed down a little bit? Have you? I mean, not reconsidered, but have you thought about that aspect of the conversation? And I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, I definitely have considered a lot of my responses in those senses, and I agree with you that like I don't know, I think there's two elements to conversations, right? Where there's like this veneer of politeness and this adherence to form that like people can have, like you can adequately interact with people in that way, but there's also like this there is your response to the stuff that's happening and the way that you kind of process and interact with it, and I do look back at those times and those things, and sort of ask myself, like, what was so important about a lot of these things, and like what was the offense that like took so much of my time and effort. And I do agree that like any interaction in those dramas, I do sort of look back with in some ways as like you could call it regret, but I do definitely try to learn the lesson from that, and to like that there is a way to really step back from a lot of this interaction and see it more as people's personas interacting in this media, rather than actual like persons, rather than like the real I don't know, the real characters that are actually behind these people. I kind of feel like there's a mask that we put up in our social interactions online that doesn't like really translates to personal interactions.
That is actually a point I think that I discussed with I can't remember if it was Negation of P or Matthew Steele. That very exact point, the fact that I am of the persuasion that nobody is really himself on this media. I mean, and it's not because okay, so there's some people that do that on purpose. But I also think that even if you try to approach to this kind of media to have a conversation, even with the best intentions, the media itself is a kind of a barrier. It's something that doesn't make you express. It would be the same thing if me and you would have the same conversation, in writing. it would be different, because we will probably pay a little bit more attention. I wouldn't say, that much. So,
and I would like if like that the speed of the medium would like kind of dictate that I would want to like explicate my position more to like kind of staunch any questions you might have before they come about, before I get to any next points, right? Because we're not talking in just real time and able to like stop each other if we don't understand something. And I think, and like I get what you mean. Like I was going to say that like it really is almost something that's mechanical about the medium itself. And I think when we first kind of had G Plus and these Hangouts, I think there was a real, I don't know. I think even I got kind of swept up in the idea that this like new media sort of allowed us to interact in a way that wasn't possible before, and like interact in a way that's more genuine than say like just talking on a Skype call or even just like talking on the phone in some ways, because there was this kind of group mentality. You could have all these people interacting all at once, which was like a very, interesting dynamic to have with these video calls. The video call themselves allows you to see like some body movement and language and things like that. So that's like a new thing. And I don't know, I think we all sort of like maybe fell for the illusion that sort of provided us like with an honest representation of people that we were interacting with, right? That it felt more genuine, and it,
right.
In some ways it maybe was, but it wasn't the real deal. And we were still like, I think I realized it probably like halfway through my YouTube career that like, that I wasn't like, that there really was a part of me that was like, had to prepare for all of these YouTube Hangouts, and that like, that when I became like online, there was like this like part of like this character that I was playing, that I had developed, and like you sort of have to be that character in order to come to other people's expectations in the interaction, right? And I think like there is like maybe like a social pressure there that like that we maybe weren't aware of right away, and I think that you become more aware of it the more you interact with people.
Yeah, and that is also that is also really, I think it might be really dangerous, because not everybody realizes that, or at least, is conscious of that. And there is a lot of people, unfortunately, now I'm not saying that this is not possible, right? But there is a lot of people which are really convinced that they meet people on the internet, even through this media, and they say willy-nilly, oh, yeah, he's my friend. And I've always been super, duper careful about that. Hey, listen, man, I mean, the fact that we can have a conversation without telling each other to fuck off, that doesn't necessarily mean that we are friends. Be super careful, and it's really dangerous, because a lot of people have been burned by that. So
yeah, I remember one of my first Hangouts. I think it was like right after Fundamentally Flawed or something like that, and we were discussing like whether like someone said something like well, now you and Jason Burns are like friends now, and like so like now like this and that, and I was like, well, I remember I stopped him and I was just like, well, like I don't necessarily consider him like a friend that's a term that like I don't know, I have like a very specific idea about, and like it was like a in-person sort of thing. Like I never had a conception of people being friends that I'd only met online, right? That always seemed like they're like you could be an acquaintance and even be friendly with each other, but that it could never like sort of rise to that intimacy level. And like, but over like the course of my interaction with people on the Google Hangouts, like I was always genuinely like touched and surprised with how intimate people were with me, and like who like they felt like they could really trust me, and like with a lot of like personal things. And I never broke that trust ever, because I really did feel like, they were like genuinely like sharing those sort of intimate details with people. Like, I don't know, I think you save that for people that you feel genuinely comfortable with as a friend. And I never wanted to break that trust. Like, I always did feel.
I had the very same conversation, I remember, with Ozzy a long time ago. And I think that we got to a point, because funnily enough, it was more I wouldn't say that it was more convinced of the fact that you can be friends on the internet, but it was way less cynical than me and you are right now. Yeah. And I remember we got to a middle point where we said, okay, listen, let's say this: I cannot call you a friend. I can make a subcategory that I can call internet friend. It's not a full friend, but it's more than an acquaintance. So we agreed on that level, and I think that is something which is reasonable and possible. But other than that, I think it requires personal contact. I mean, I've got to know how the fuck you smell. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So,
I know exactly what you mean. That there is like a pheromone interaction that sort of happens between people, and it's that's an interesting dynamic that I think I don't know, doesn't get explored enough, especially in online circles. I think the people who live entirely online can sort of afford to ignore those sort of actual interaction issues. That's interesting. I always like what's the old joke? It's like what's the surefire way to make a title less impressive? It's like just add the words "on the internet" to the back of it. Anything on the internet, and you just don't worry about it.
So I got a question. So the question I want to ask you before we got into this angle. Again, correct me if I'm wrong, but I recall that one of the main interests that you had, one main angles that you were not exploited, but you were more interested in the conversation was metaphysics.
Mm-hmm.
Am I?
No, not at all. I mean, specifically, I've definitely kind of honed more into like a moral philosophy angle, but
Mm-hmm.
I do love all that heavy philosophy garbage is amazing.
So okay, did you like it because it's difficult? Did you like it because it's amazing? Did you like it because I don't know what drove you to that specific topics? Because I mean, they are the hard ones, right? I mean,
they are super difficult. I think one of the things is that it's fascinating to me to think about thinking, right? Like this, learning these processes of logic and justification is they're in some ways they're like just a building block towards a lot of other knowledge. And I don't know, I guess you could say that my fascination with them kind of comes out of seeing how Presup was sort of misapplying a lot of these angles, and while that's not necessarily my first experience with philosophy, it definitely is one of those things that sort of spurned me is a weird way to say it. That it sort of spurred me towards looking at philosophy as a tool for understanding the world, right? It seemed to me pretty obvious that the way that Presup was applying these philosophical terms and definitions was sort of inadequate to sort of explain them, explain their use in philosophy, but that on the surface there was this sort of these bigger questions about our knowledge and about how we know things, and any sort of epistemological issue ends up being something that's really not necessarily I don't know. It was because Presup is in its essence, it's scorched earth apologetics, right? It's about destroying the basis of everybody's knowledge base,
right,
and then pretending they have some sort of ladder to get up and out of that morass, right? And I think that just that very fact that there is this sort of way of destroying everybody's epistemology, this way of getting at that is that's a fascinating thing for someone who's coming out of a belief set that's sort of about knowledge, about knowing, the perfect thing, about coming to the correct belief and holding fast to that, right? And I think I don't know if people probably know a little bit about my background, but coming out of fundamentalism, you do tend to see those sort of destroying knowledge destroying aspects as a possible way that you're wrong about your worldview, right?
Right.
And I think that's that's a really interesting way of coming at trying to get out of a worldview in which you think there is only one correct answer.
Because
you see that there really isn't a correct answer. You can't get to that sort of certainty.
Well, I mean, of course. I mean, it's the idea that if I manage to get you to a point where you have to admit that you're wrong, I'm right, which it doesn't follow at all.
It doesn't follow at all, but
So,
but it's convincing. It's like it's a convincing tactic in a
Yeah.
moment, right? Like it's weird because like in a conversation that like does work, but like I agree that like logically there is no basis for that. But like it does like that's the thing is our interactions are more about like the adversarial approach we have in dialogue, right? And that was always a funny thing, like the idea like the how like this sort of great debate sort of focused on debate, right? In its initial sort of response, and there is still some of that out there, but that like I think people have really pushed away from the focus on debate and debate as a way of coming to
Right.
truth. Right? And I think that really is like a result of this sort of presuppositional like influence on this great debate community that this knowledge base doesn't seem like you can't really come to this to these conclusions just diametrically.
So-
Like there's
so in your opinion, right? Forgetting about people which weaponize philosophy or that kind of approach, right? I mean, dishonest people or whatever. Do you think that? Well, I mean, of course, the answer is going to be yes, but I want you to elaborate on that. But do you think that an approach which doesn't lead you to, insane rabbit holes is possible when talking about, for example, morality?
yeah, like I think it is. I don't know. I guess I've always held out the idea that we can craft language to get an idea across better. Like because there's an infinite number of I don't know semantic combinations we could play with. That like all ideas are possible to get across, and that like there's always a better way to communicate an idea. And that's like that has to do with like context, obviously, but like it has to do with shaping our message to become like a little bit more concise, to staunch objections before they happen, to be able to like really delve down into the root of where the misunderstanding is occurring, right before that sort of before the misunderstanding occurs. And I think it's possible to do. I've always thought very high. It was one of my biggest motivations in getting involved is that it seems like we can if we really work hard at it, we can make our message clearer. We can make our message more complete, right? Like it's possible to get your ideas across in a better way the more experience you have with interactions, and that like as we sort of like come across the objections to our position or come away with an idea as to like what somebody else thinks, like we are expanding our ability to sort of like communicate ideas in a clear fashion. Like we're making a concise way of speaking easier. And I know that's a long way of saying that.
No, I would tend to agree with you. There is also the fact that there are some aspects which are usually totally dismissed. In this, well, even those days where they were kind of dismissed, those kind of conversation. But things like, for example, personal experience, right? I mean, that used to be something that the moment that somebody said, or even
Yeah.
hinted at that, it was immediately ostracized. Well, yeah, okay, yeah, it's your personal experience. Fuck off. It doesn't work for me. And I think
Yeah.
that's a big mistake, because there are some things that they're so tied with the person that you're talking to. And again, we are starting from the point that we want to have an honest conversation with somebody else, right? So that is the basis. And some things are so tied with the person you're talking to that pretending to have a conversation on something which affects the person that much, and again, we talk about morals, but it might be, even something else. It's a huge mistake. What do you think about that? I mean, I'm not saying that it has to be a finishing point, right? But it can be an interesting angle, and if developed properly, it can get to an interesting conversation. Because again, and then I'll shut up. We might have a different idea on something, and that's probably because of our different upbringing, the culture we lived in. And again, these are all personal experiences, right? So if we don't get that, how can we possibly pretend to get an agreement on an argument if we are starting from different cultural basis?
Yeah, I mean that might be the age-old problem, right? I don't know. It kind of hints at like one of my final questions there, and I think that we we always have that big question mark as to whether or not our communications are actually clear, right? Like whether or not what we're communicating is like the actual thought we've communicated, or we're communicating something different to the person who's receiving that information. And a lot of that has to do with their context, with the personal experiences that they have imbibed over the years and internalized. And it depends on which ones they've internalized and which ones they've chosen to ignore. So there's a question mark over everybody's head in terms of like the context that you're using. And I think that's why what you're saying is like really important, and something that like I've definitely learned over the years is that we do need to accept people's personal experiences in like very like real accepting ways, right? Like can't be dismissive of it, even if what we internally believe is that somehow their belief about that experience they had isn't actually accurate, right? I think we owe it to ourselves to hear it out in their terms and to really try to use it to frame how we communicate to them in the future, right? And I don't know. That's maybe like the hardest part of this, right? Is that like this sort of like determining whether or not our communications are clear, or even determining what the context of someone is like there's a series of judgment calls that sort of comes about, right? And I think a lot of this is just leap of faith shit that we end up having to do. We end up just like kind of projecting ourselves outwards and hoping for the best. But I think that those interactions are always have a big possibility of misunderstanding that, I don't know, always kind of fascinated me, especially when it comes with talking to people internationally.
Right.
I know between like you, like I know everybody on the European side of the conversation like always expresses like a real disbelief with maybe the sincerity of the fundamentalist beliefs here. And I think that for people who've grown up with it or interact with those people on a regular basis, that feels very strange to have that even questioning, right? Because for us that's just the background hum that's happening.
Yeah.
Right?
No. I mean, again, I can speak for everybody, but me personally, I would say that it took me years to accept the fact that actually fundamentalists, they do exist, live and breathe among you guys.
Yeah.
So, I mean, because for us, it was like, yeah, I mean, of course, I know there are people which believe that the earth is flat. I mean, I never met one, but there must be. And because I'm also sure that there is people which believe that fairy tales are real. And that is the level that I personally had with people that believe that the earth is 6,000 years old, or believe that the Bible is literal. That is exactly the same level of astonishment. So to me, I can tell you it took me years to actually, not only accept the fact that they existed, but where you guys live, there are a reality. It's not something that, I mean, when we find one, we actually put them in, I think they have a right to a pension or a zoo, stuff like that, because they are endangered species. You know what I mean? So, yeah, we just care for them because we pamper them, We don't want them to breed, but, yeah, we just,
keep them in a zoo. I get it.
Yeah. Okay, so
I know I wouldn't mind a neutering program for fundamentalists here.
Yeah, okay, yeah, fair enough. Let me switch gear a little bit and talk about something completely different, because another passion that I remember you had was, and I think it still is, politics and social issues.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to mention to you 4 things that I want your opinion on.
Mm-hmm.
And this is also because of your background. So the 4 things are anarchy, postmodernism, do-it-yourself culture and punk. Go.
Those are all interesting. I like, I of course like punk rock sort of forces you into certain like you make political choices as you sort of interact in those scenes, right?
Sorry, before you go on, for all the
Yeah.
fuckers out there which listen, this is me making research on the people I talk to, right? 'Cause
Yeah. Yeah.
I
No,
know
totally. That's,
those four things are not by chance. It's not the kind of question I'm gonna make to Ozzy. It's gonna make to you.
yeah.
Okay?
No, but no, of course, I've flirted with like anarchism as like a political philosophy, and I think that like there are a lot of like excellent ideas that sort of evolve out of that. Some of like the attitudinal shifts that people experience when they do join like anarchist groups can be kind of transformative. Some of the reading lists are amazing. So I think there's some real meat there, right? And I think like what always impressed me about any anarchist I met, or at least self-proclaimed one, was that they were always like incredibly dedicated to activism and to being active in politics and to really feeling like they were sort of having some impact on the world around them, even if it wasn't through direct democratic means or even interacting with their elected representatives, right? And so I think there was like a real sense there that like sort of politics was like sort of an everyday thing, that you needed to be involved in it. In terms of like the do-it-yourself culture, I am incredibly impressed with the way that punk rock like has always had that attitude, and that like even when there are better ways of doing things, oftentimes punk rock does things like the hard way or the old way. And I remember seeing lots of examples of that all over punk rock, but it's like it's always this it's this mentality that like because we don't have any sort of like because we were so proud of not having any sort of backing or resources, that like there is this sense of community that develops that doesn't like really happen without like that when you have like other people sort of interacting with you that way, and that sort of a sense of isolation and that sense of being on your own is in fact like the way that communities sort of grow up, that like communities sort of find ways of interacting with each other. And I remember like punk rock was like incredible for that. Like I remember seeing a lot of acceptance for like our queer and trans friends in the punk rock community that like really I didn't see anywhere else. And there was a real sense of openness that like sort of was engendered by it, which I think is sort of like that feels like, I don't know, almost contradictory to do it yourself as a mentality, right? Where it seems like individualism is in fact like the thing that matters there, but I think that like a real do it yourself like sort of genre like that sort of is like it's a community building thing, and I think that's an interesting aspect to it. Now in terms of postmodernism, I never wanted to claim to be like an expert in it or anything like that, but I do in fact like adhere to a lot of the things that postmodernisms advocate for, and like I do find a lot of their ways of criticizing literature, society, economics, like all of these things that these readers and writers have kind of come across are, I find them incredibly valuable. And I don't know if that makes me a postmodernist. I don't know if there is like even a label to be a postmodernist. And there's definitely no groups you can join, like in terms of like postmodernist clubs. But I think that like what we see like with a lot of these postmodernist thinkers is the ideas that are like incorporated into society now, that like the way we read books now is like a result of postmodern thinking, and that like a lot of these people who pretend to be conservatives or pretend to be bucking against that postmodern trend are in fact like sort of existing in the world that postmodern criticism has yielded and are continuing to do it, right? Like, so I think that there is that the more I look around, it seems like the more postmodernism just is a part of our world, and that the better we understand it, the more clear our world actually becomes.
So here's the thing that it might be alien to you. So if it is, just tell me, because especially in Europe, and I would say in Italy more, well, maybe France definitely, Germany too. The postmodernist phenomenon which is in no way a new thing, right?
Hmm.
It is tied to another mostly artistic wave, which was called futurism. Is it the same thing in the US too, or because from my understanding of your approach to postmodernism, uh, it seems to me that it's missing that kind of root. So it's
Hmm.
something which developed in a different way. So can you
Yeah.
explain to me a little bit about that?
I mean, I don't have a ton of history on like the history of the Frankfurt School, but I know that like many of its thinkers ended up coming to America and influencing a lot of the interaction here. And it does seem like you're right that there isn't this idea of like a futurism, right? Like that the that what was modern now just becomes just a like a breakdown rather than something that's like something aimed towards a creation of something else. And I think that like you do see that like the this real switch into a negative perspective rather than a positive one. I know that like in the Frankfurt School originally that critical theory really was always there was always this aim towards a goal of an improved society or world, and that like it
Right.
was very explicit in its criticism of it that like that had to be the goal in the application of critical theory. And I don't get a lot of that same sense from American versions of postmodernism. So I do take some of that like that there is like this lack of goal orientation that can sort of come about when you become so enamored with the idea that critical theory can like sort of explode and like I don't know and can reveal like really huge insights into the structure of things that like we hadn't quite thought through as clearly as we'd hoped or like had developed sort of beyond our conscious control.
So do you think there are aspects of post? So okay, let me rephrase that. What do you think are the aspects of postmodernism which would be really healthy and helpful in the current political situation? Let's say where you live. Okay.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm not sure if healthy would be. That's a difficult. I think there's
Yeah,
maybe a
because
subjective value there. I think
no,
reading
because
postmodernism
sorry, I
would be
just so
eye-opening, but I don't know if it would be helpful in
well,
terms.
no, and that is because the biggest critique to that kind of movements is that yeah, I mean, okay, they're all hunky dory, yeah, more power to you. That's really interesting, but they, how do you make them work? And you just say, okay, oh fuck, I haven't thought about that. So what I would say, is there some aspects that can be actually, properly implemented, in a more wide society, can be accepted by and be helpful, to the general consensus, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like at the very least, critical theory allows for a decentering of any singular perspective, right? So I would say that like if critical theory could be applied to a society, that like what would happen would be an expansion of equality throughout that society. That like the ability to sort of decenter any one particular group in society would allow us to like really think about equality in more like I don't know easy more rational terms, more easy to separate out terms. And I think that like those sort of analyses can help to yield those sort of outcomes like that if we really can see that like there is essentially like a centrally located group in within a societal structure, then our ability to change that structure or to make it more inclusive to more groups will can only expand, right? But I don't know, like one of the things that I find probably like one of the problems I think I have with that question is that I think that postmodernism and critical theory is just a tool, right? And that
I understand.
in a hand that is like not being genuine or like is has a specific goal in mind, critical theory could be used to break things down in another direction, right? Like could be used to locate where structures can be centralized, could where advantages can be gained, and that critical theory like also like has probably what you might call enough ambiguity in it that like there's a plethora of interpretations that come about, and like also critical theory like sort of implies that there are multiple interpretations of any one particular passage. So it sort of multiplies its own problems, right?
Yeah.
While it can be a useful tool for analysis, like you still have this idea. This like I would say just the ambiguity alone is enough that like you could really utilize it for any end, and I think that's maybe where people's biggest problem with it is that if you have a specific goal in mind, you can utilize this kind of thing for pretty much anything. You can make it sound like rigorous, academically rigorous or intellectually justified. You know.
Okay, listen, man. I think we are 40 minutes in, and
Damn it.
the attention span of the people is. Say what?
Yeah, exactly. I know we got to keep it snappy. And
Yeah.
time flies when I'm having fun, but not so much for everybody
Well,
else.
I mean, that ties to one of the things you said before about properly trying to exploit a topic. So, I think in a way we are, but we are also losing. We are also leaving a lot of loose ends, and that's on purpose because people might think about it. I might say, "Oh, that one little bunch of shit they said." They said everything and they didn't get to any conclusion.
I certainly hope so. That was one of my favorite parts about interacting with people.
Oh, yeah.
Online. Was
By the way-
getting called out on my shit. Oh, that was my favorite.
And listen, I mean, if somebody's here because they want to have the definite word or definite solution, they can fuck off right now. You wasted 40 minutes. Anyway, so this is the part where I'm going to read you the 3 questions that you sent me that you want me to ask you. So the first question, the first question is, John, you are a devastatingly handsome lad. Tell me, how do you maintain your boyish good looks?
Oh, well, thank you, Fabio. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
And okay, cutting. So now I can make that my screensaver. It's wonderful. So Fabio, I work hard and I don't have any kids. I'm pretty sure that's the only thing that like manages to maintain my boyish good looks. I don't know. I look around online and it seems like kids must devastate an individual. Is that true, Fabio?
I don't know. See you at 55. This is where I am right now, so I'll wait there.
All right. Well, I only got a couple years left. Full disclosure, I'm 39, so I don't know. Most people would probably.
Oh, fuck off! Really?
Yeah, totally, bud.
Fuck off. Okay, so hold on.
I'll attempt to fuck off, but.
Yeah. You do. You're gonna make it. Believe me. I'm gonna tell you fuck off enough times that you eventually will have to. So you read a lot, right? Second question. You read a lot, right? What are you reading at the moment?
Perfect. Well, always I'm trying to read at least like 3, maybe 4 books at a time. Mostly that's just because I get really bored doing stuff like that. So, like right now, I'm reading a collection of Oscar Wilde's poetry, prose, and plays. Everything's just great. Oscar Wilde is an incredible writer. I don't know, I guess I'd always heard of him, but like never really did I have like a real sense that he had like this real genius for verse that like a lot of people don't have. The other thing I'm reading right now is Jürgen Habermas's The Metaphysics of Social Interaction, or the Preface to Social Interaction, one of those weird titles. And it's about communication, and he breaks down like the ways communication have to operate and how it's really an intersubjective activity that we do, and that you can't really define things in terms of your of a single actor. You always have to define things in terms of the person you're talking to, which like kind of creates this like intersubjective dialogue that has to happen whenever we're defining anything, and each statement is a declaration of a definition that that the other person is meant to challenge. And I don't know, it's this very big work that I'm plotting my way through right now. It's very postmodern, because so that usually means that it like takes me like 5 minutes to get through one page.
the astonishing thing is not what you read; it's the fact that you still have a girlfriend. Actually. So yeah, okay, good job. I don't know how you do
Yeah.
that, but yeah, you did something right.
Totally. And I just finished a couple sci-fi books. One by R. Pohl, I think his name is Robert or R. Pohl. I
Paul,
don't think
it's
his first name.
Poul.
Yeah, Pohl, I think it is.
Oh, Paul.
Um,
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
Okay, yeah.
and like man, I was really impressed with
Oh, yeah.
two.
It's
The
very good.
Drunkard's Walk was just phenomenal. Just a short little book, but man, I blew right through. It was
It's
really great.
It's very good. It's very
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm always so impressed with writers in general. And I don't know. Yeah. I love books so much. It's hard to put them down sometimes. But you're right. Yeah. How do I have a girlfriend? That's a good question.
Yeah. So
A lot of,
the third question is: are you thinking what I'm thinking?
yeah. Now that gets to like what I think maybe we're talking about is that like there is always this question about like whether or not you and I are on the same page in any conversation. And I think that like that is one of those things that's really pushed when we start talking to like fundamentalists or like you said, flat earthers or people who believe some crazy thing is
Right.
that conception like of them in our brain like is sort of it's hard for us to see them thinking the same things as us or to envision our communications in that same way. And I think it's important for us to recognize that we all kind of modify our speech when we are sort of confronted with those interactions. That like as people don't respond in ways that like we don't sort of recognize, we like do modify ourselves to sort of like talk to them in a different way. And like that's I think like maybe our most important thing is to recognize that like our that we're not all just thinking the same thing, and that like we all just don't have like the same thing doesn't spring to mind when we say something to each other. And I don't know like I'm always like a little mystified that we end up being able to communicate at all in some ways. That there is this like this ability to commonly communicate, even though the way that I construct a sentence could be totally different from the way that you would construct that same sentence,
Yeah.
right? To even get the same idea across, we would both choose entirely different sentence structures or ways of even coming about the topic itself. And I don't know, those are fascinating things for me. I think that like communication is like one of those things that like this medium can yield for us. Like it can
Yes.
yield insights into it. Like
Yeah.
the way that we interact like sort of does like point to the limitations of our communication.
Yeah, and also, I mean, going back to what we were saying before about this kind of media, how it falsifies the person that you have in front. I think that one good thing that can be said about it is that you can collapse a lot of back and forth, a lot of dialogue, a lot of conversation in a short amount of time. And if you're having that with the right person, you can actually get to a point where it is reasonable that you at least are on the same page.
Yeah, you can walk away thinking that you understood each other at least.
Right.
And I think that, like that's an amazing feat that I think that we maybe don't appreciate as humans enough. That even though our experiences can be so diverse that like we can still communicate really complex ideas and experiences to each other, without too much trouble.
Okay, listen, man, it's been a super duper pleasure.
A blast.
Yeah, I mean, I can. Okay, so this is one of the things, the moment that it is really difficult to convey how good it was for me, because it was really good, and I hope that it was half as good for you, because if it was half as good, it's still really good, because believe me,
No,
I had a blast.
I loved it so much, and I've been working my way back on these the one interview that nobody cares about. Picking out a few of my favorites here and there. I kind of missed Alex Botton's voice, so I ran that one. So I mean, like, but I don't know. They're all fascinating. It's interesting to hear people talking about this stuff. Even though it was just a couple years ago, it does start to feel like ancient history because of how much has evolved and changed, right? And I think that it's not the same community that it was.
It's not the
10
same,
years
but a lot of things are the same. It's just different actors, and it's the same. So I think one of the things that is interesting about this conversation is that how some things were the same and the approach was different. So yeah, I mean, it's cool.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome.
Yeah,
I'm
I'm still married, so yeah.
I see that. Wonderful.
Fuck off. Yeah, there you go. Nothing. Okay, man.
Yeah.
Take care. It's been a pleasure.
It's awesome, Fabio. We'll talk to you later, bud.
Yeah, bless you. Bye bye.
Peace. Bye.
If I didn't care more than words can say, if I didn't care, would I feel this way?